I'm so happy I'm doing this one. This is just, I have a very special relationship to this particular, it's called a far-reaching practice. If you're going to be a bodhisattva, this is one of those qualities of mind that you must have. It is a requirement. So I wanted to first give a little bit of the closest that I could get to a clear definition of what joyous effort is. And it's going to segue beautifully off of Venerable Tarpa's talk yesterday. And then I want to share a little bit of my personal experience on my journey on how I've kind of working with this. And then we'll go through, there's different kinds of joyous effort, and then there is a particular mind state that is a huge obstacle to cultivating it. And then there are some really wonderful, what they call favorable conditions that help to sustain it and nourish it and keep it going, because this is quite a long journey. And then if I've got some time, some two qualities that are very helpful in how to practice it daily life. So begin first with Lama Tsongkhapa, who's this wonderful sage in the Tibetan Buddhist world. He's one of our great teachers from Tibet, a scholar, a meditator, a holder of the Vinaya, an author, a debater, a teacher, a guide, just an amazing being. And one of the quotes that he says is, armored with unremitting and steady effort, scriptural knowledge and insight grow like the waxing moon. All your activities become meaningful, and whatever you undertake will be completely successful. Knowing this, the bodhisattvas exert themselves to make powerful, enthusiastic effort which dispels all laziness. So we're going to kind of put on our bodhisattva in training caps today as we go through this. Okay, so here's the definition to kind of set the tone on what we're looking at here today. The mind that takes delight in virtue or what is wholesome. And since it needs an object, it can't arise by itself. The object is any activity motivated by a virtuous intention to benefit either our future lives or to benefit others. It's a particular kind of joy that keeps us going through practicing the Dharma, which will have a lot of ups and downs, a lot of difficulties, a lot of challenges. It is a state of mind, and this is my take on it, it's a state of mind that relishes wholesome actions, cultivates them, has no sense of too hard, too long, too busy, too bored, too old, too young, too stupid. It dispels all those misconceptions. However, it is not the joy and enthusiasm that comes from doing all the worldly things we do, working, being with family, endeavoring worldly things, in which we devote a lot of our time. Nor is it the kind of dutiful effort to create virtue that has a sense of obligation. I should, I ought to, I need to, you're supposed to. It's not frenetic. It's relaxed and happy. So that's what joyous effort is. The mind is amazing. So I'm going to tell you what kind of mind I was conditioned to have. Childhood. I don't know if this is a Western cultural thing, or maybe this is just a Nesbitt family thing. But I was raised with, very, very early on, endeavoring, efforting, came along with huge shoulds, huge supposed tos, have tos, because I said so. The other thing that came into play very, very early on in my life were the 8 worldly concerns. I learned early to do things to get praise and to avoid criticism. Okay, so we've got praise and blame. Early on, do this because to be a good girl, and if not, look out. To effort so as not to get punished. All right, so there's pleasure and pain, the 8 worldly concerns. So you do things, and in my household, you did it because you could get punished severely. To get reward for my efforts and not to have privileges or things taken away. No curfews, no, you're grounded, your toys are taken away. So here's loss and gain, the 8 worldly concerns of having material possessions and losing them. And certainly as I got older, to have others think well of me rather than to think badly. So then there's that 4th set of 8 worldly concerns, which is fame and shame. So I don't know about you folks, but early on, these are the kind of motivations that propelled my life on why I did what I did. So coming to the Dharma, it's not like I came to the Abbey here and I left all that stuff at the door. And the thing that's so remarkable about, offering service, particularly here at the Abbey, because it's the experience that I have in my life every day, is that we have the opportunity to create so much merit because the object of our offerings, whether it's our resources, our time, our practice, is the three jewels. There's no other object of karma that you can create more merit, more positive potential, more virtue than offering yourself in whatever form you can to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And at the Abbey here, that's the opportunity. But you have to have a virtuous intention to accumulate it. So what I did is I came into this most beautiful, excellent condition to practice, and I brought my whole bag of 8 worldly concerns with me. So that soon after I got here, I took on this caricature. She was called Sergeant Joyous Effort. And she had all the conditioning. And the things that she had that were the most favorite was attachment to reputation, fear of being criticized, huge attachment to her ideas that the way that she wanted to do things was right. So here I was in this incredible conducive environment to practice, to have my teacher here, to have the Sangha here, the Buddha Dharma. And I spent all of my time just simply being propelled by the 8 worldly concerns. So I created some virtue and my mind could bring in some joy. I was the wizard of efforting, but I didn't know how to experience or cultivate joy. And so many times I actually created quite a bit of destructive karma here because I was getting angry, I was getting resentful. I was extremely attached to what I was doing here. So finally I kind of ran up against a wall and kind of took myself out for a few months and realized that I had to really do things differently. I couldn't sustain that kind of efforting that doesn't have the joy, the lightness, the delight in creating virtue. So Sergeant Joyous Effort went to the Bahamas a few years ago, and I'm working, I've come a long way. I mean, there's still some of the 8 worldly concerns are still there, but I've come a long way. But to realize that on the path to awakening, where to become a Buddha, we have to create the cause and conditions for that, but it's by creating virtue and taking delight in it that we have to really work with these 8 worldly concerns that are so much of our motivations on why we do what we do. So then we go into, well, why is it important to cultivate joyous effort? Well, nowadays, people do just about, I try to put a list together of what other people do for us. They do our taxes, they do our laundry, they fix our cars, they fix our computers, they build our houses, they take care of our kids, they take care of our parents. I mean, the list is incredible. However, no sentient being can eat for us, no sentient being can sleep for us, and no sentient being can practice for us. This is our responsibility. If we want to progress along the path, we want to practice to become Buddhists, we have got to do it ourselves. We get a lot of support, we get a lot of cooperative conditions to practice, but we're the ones who set the motivations, we're the ones who endeavor, we're the ones who cultivate the mind for awakening. It's the principal cause of accomplishing the qualities needed for Buddhahood. And so there are these bodhisattvas, these beings who are well ahead of where we are currently, that have got this spontaneous wish to benefit all beings. And because they do, they want to become Buddhists as quickly as they can. So they're intent on awakening, and they adopt a certain kind of life, a certain kind of thinking, a certain kind of way of life. And the Buddha gave teachings on this way of life and how to live it. And the teachings are all subsumed in what we call the 6 far-reaching practices. So we've got ethical conduct, we've got generosity, we've got fortitude, we've got joyous effort, we've got meditative stability, and we've got wisdom. So the entire bodhisattva path can be subsumed underneath these 6 far-reaching practices. And what bodhisattvas are trying to do to accomplish the deed of awakening for the well-being of others, they have to have, and we have to have, certain circumstances that really give us the best opportunity to practice. So for a continual spiritual practice, we have to have plentiful resources. We've got to have food, shelter, clothing, medicine, and we also have to have strong bodies and minds, and we need a lot of support from teachers and friends. And that these 6 far-reaching practices, when practiced correctly and with this joyous effort, can create the causes to have those kind of conditions to be able to progress along the path. So the first 3 perfections, generosity, ethical conduct, and fortitude, are practiced in relationship to others. All right, so we try to be generous with others, we try not to harm them, and we practice fortitude in relationship to whatever is perceived, whatever difficulties come from their side. The last 2, which are concentration or wisdom, are important for our own well-being and our own personal development. So these are more about how we cultivate our inner strength and our inner wisdom so that we can do these other 6 far-reaching practices. And joyous effort is required for all 5 of those. So whether you're practicing generosity, practicing ethical conduct, fortitude, concentration, or wisdom, you need this mind that delights in creating virtue to sustain all of those practices. And as it's interesting because we had the other night when we were talking about meditating on death, that it's important in the beginning of the path, the middle of the path, and the end of the path, so too joyous effort. It's crucial in the beginning of the path when it takes joyous effort into our practice and just beginning to develop our good qualities, getting into learning what to abandon, like start working on the anger, start working on the fear, start working on the pride. Similar to, analogous to a farmer planting seeds in his garden, in his field, and watering them to help them germinate, to help them get started. Then in the middle of the path, where we need a sustained practice to maintain those good qualities, to continue to abandon the negativities, it's analogous to a farmer watering his crops in order for the plants to thrive. So the plant needs to grow strong roots, it needs to grow a strong structure of leaf and branches and stem, and then at the end, when we want to maximize all of our good qualities to their fullest potential, is analogous to a farmer or gardener watering their crops so we can have beautiful fruit. So joyous effort's really important no matter what stage of the path that we are. It prevents good qualities from decreasing. In fact, it helps them to increase. The body and the mind, believe it or not, become easier to control and become more workable in regards to creating virtue with joyous effort. So right now, our bodies and minds think it's really, really hard to do good things. We're much more habituated to the pleasures of this life. I mean, did you ever notice how excited you get when you get ready to make your plans for vacation? Or you're going to go Christmas shopping? Or going out to dinner with friends? There's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of enthusiasm, there's a lot of planning. We don't quite have that kind of enthusiasm when it comes to reining in our afflictions and benefiting people in need. So what we need to do is somehow transfer that enthusiasm for virtue. This is 90% of the path, is being able to transfer our enthusiasm for the pleasures and the 8 worldly concerns of this life, transferring them over to creating virtue and creating the causes for awakening. It's kind of the main roadmap for the practice of the path. So there are 3 kinds of joyous effort. Okay, so you got a toolbox with this joyous effort, but there are 3 kinds that come into play different parts of your practice. So we want to cultivate all of them, and here's just a short summary of some of the qualities of each. So the first one is called armor-like joyous effort. Generally, I don't like military terms. But when it comes to certain aspects of the path, they really work to get us get a feeling of what we're up against. So Geshe Sopa and Geshe Sonam Rinchen, who are 2 teachers of Venerable Chögyens, both have passed away, but they're remarkable lamas, wrote books on the Buddhist teachings. They use the weapon analogy. And they say that this armored joyous effort is very, very important because we're up against one of our biggest enemies to creating virtue and rejoicing, which is the self-centered thought. All right, so this is the thought that says all the actions that we do have got to be somehow benefit, somehow profit us. We are the center of the universe. We're the most important being in the world. So the armor-like effort is one of the main counterforces against this continual self-referencing, self-preoccupation, self-interest, because that's totally opposite to having a kind of mind that wants to practice joyous effort in regards to helping and benefiting others. So we need this armor light because I don't know about you, but my self-centered thought is extremely sneaky. It's brilliant. It's relentless. So who wouldn't want to be armored? I mean, it's almost like you got to put on, I don't know. I always sort of go, military terms, but I can see needing to be armored when I'm fighting against my self-centered thought. And so joyous effort is the mind that fights that. It also fights discouragement, because without it we become extremely impatient. The path to Buddhahood is no small feat. And along the way, we're going to get impatient because we keep, okay, all right already. When is it going to happen? When am I going to cultivate this virtue that I need to become a Buddha? So, if we want to attain our goal in as short a time as possible, it's not going to happen. So joyous effort is a wonderful antidote to discouragement and to impatience of any sort. We have to be able to meet hardship on the Bodhisattva path. And hardship, I think it was Geshe Sonam Rinchen who said, let's call it opportunities for awakening rather than hardship, without getting upset or wavering in the face of difficulties. And there will be difficulties because, first of all, we're trying to counteract the self-centered thought, the ignorance, the afflictions that have controlled our mind stream since beginningless time. I mean, that's no small task. This particular kind of joyous effort is crucial when we hear the teachings that say to become a Buddha is going to take 3 countless great eons. I mean, I just get tired just hearing about it. It seems very, very daunting. 3 countless great eons. Who in their right minds can be so determined? Who are these bodhisattvas anyway? We don't have any mental comparison on how long it takes. I mean, if it takes me, a day and a half to weed the garden, I think it takes too long. How can I imagine how long 3 countless great eons are to become a Buddha? However, Geshe Sopa gives us some very encouraging words on how to cultivate this joyous effort, this armor-like joyous effort. He says that it's very important to admire the bodhisattvas who are generating this profoundly. And he says one of the ways that we start to do it is to say to ourselves, he says, just admiring bodhisattvas or this kind of joyous effort in others is wonderful, and it eventually creates the causes for us to develop it in ourselves as well. So just wishing, just to have the mental thought, may I be able, sometime in the future, to free all beings from suffering and lead them to awakening is a very powerful thought. You imagine yourself confident, happy, without any reservation about doing anything that a sentient being needs to be happy. No problem, I'm happy to do it. This kind of thought training gives the mind enormous power over time. It's like an armor that is made of something very precious and something very impenetrable. This kind of thinking, even for a few moments each day, will grow the courage to face any difficulty while helping others. It creates more merit than years and years of practicing generosity, and accumulates vast amounts of merit and purifies a lot of past negative karma. And it removes a huge amount of obstacles. So just imagine if one time a day, when either you're looking at the news and you're seeing what's going on in the world, and you just say, may one day, may I be able to alleviate the suffering of the people in Syria, the animals that are getting, killed in the water, whatever, that creates a familiarity over time to actually be able to realize that as an activity. So this is where we have to remember that to cultivate the cause and conditions for awakening, it doesn't have to be a lot of extraordinary stuff. It can start really, really small. It can really, really start ordinary, mundane almost. But these kind of thoughts, because our minds are so powerful, that these kind of thoughts have a huge amount of power. And that armor-like joyous effort is the antidote for discouragement. And we're going to talk about discouragement a little bit more later on. It's a form of laziness. Okay, so there's the first kind of joyous effort. The second kind of joyous effort is the joyous effort of gathering virtue. You have a basket, and you're going to go through your life gathering virtue. By practicing the 6 far-reaching practices, so once again, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom, at whatever level we're at, to learn to identify our good qualities and putting them to use. Don't let them get kind of dormant and crotchety and stiff. We find out that we're good at one particular virtuous quality, and we put that to use by benefiting others. So the armor-like joyous effort prevents discouragement, and now we have to create the causes and conditions for our awakening and counteract the mañana mentality. Oh, I'm going to do it tomorrow, which is the second kind of laziness, which is the laziness of procrastination. All right, so this is the second way, this is the second kind of joyous effort that counteracts this particular thing. And we have mañana mentality huge in this culture. That's a very powerful joyous effort. And also to realize that we totally underestimate the power that gathering virtue entails, and how simple acts of kindness and compassion with a sincere motivation can produce a great amount of virtue. So for those of us who've been listening to the Gamchen Lamrim, and Venerable's been doing these teachings on karma, that one of the characteristics of karma is that small actions bring big results, whether virtuous or non-virtuous. Like an acorn, you put it in the ground, it grows an oak tree. So understanding that your small kindnesses during the day, your practices of generosity and patience and, not harming little creatures and things like that, that stuff really starts to accumulate. And it will bring a larger result in the future. So to not underestimate, once again, the small kindnesses. Don't blow them off, just say, well, that's not a big deal, why bother? Is to do every little kindness you can in the course of the day. It doesn't have to be, it can be spontaneous, or you're going to have to think about it and make a decision there on the street corner. Should I do this or not? It's okay. Just do it. Third joyous effort is the joyous effort of benefiting living beings. So one of the reasons we don't put an effort into creating virtue is that we are only interested in seeking the happiness of this life and what benefits us. There's those 8 worldly concerns again. This joyous effort is the antidote for the laziness of busyness, where we get caught up in the happiness of this life for ourselves alone. So working for living beings entails wholeheartedly devoting our physical energy and resources to helping them. There are a limitless variety of them, and so the ways to benefit them are equally limitless depending on their needs and capacities. So here are a few of them. So, even the Buddha lays them out. Okay, if you're not quite sure what it means to benefit sentient beings, I'm going to give you a list. Even though there's limitless amounts of opportunities, I'm going to tell you at least 11 of them. That will give you a good start. Once again, just take these into your life. There's nothing profound about them, but they can create the causes for something profound. All right, first of all, helping the suffering or sick. All right, anybody, friends, family, strangers. We have to work on helping suffering of people that we have difficulty with, but we can do that too. Usually we've had people doing profound practices as being children of aging parents. Where there could be a lot of difficulty in that as parents their health starts to fail, their minds start to fail, to be able to practice benefiting them, even though there's a lot of this push and pull with having moms and dads that are aging and we're taking care of them full time. The second one is providing help to others who wish to realize their goals by ethical means. Okay, so you're not going to help somebody rob a bank. You're going to have to help somebody who wants to start, a nonprofit, who wants to help, lost dogs, something. There's so many things that you can start. Help those who are confused and are involved in a negative course of action by helping them understand what is worth cultivating, what needs to be abandoned. This is, my experience of this one is, I think this is where Venerable Tarpa's teaching us on equanimity, that sometimes members of our family are going down a very wrong path, and we know so much what would be helpful for them to do rather than what they're doing. We really want to help them because they're really confused, they're involved in all sorts of negative, destructive actions, but they don't want to hear it. All right, so it's not like we close the door, but it's very, very important to leave the door open and to keep the mind not in resentment, not in anger, not in impatience or frustration, but to realize that there may be a time they might step out of their confusion even for a moment, and that they would be able to hear what we had to say. So for people who are confused, offering friendship by offering service to others, such as helping strangers and Dharma travelers, giving directions, helping somebody who's broken down on the side of the road. We have to be wise and safe about that. Showing people who are stranded access to public services. We've gotten broken down in town before, and people come up and give us a hand. Total strangers. So offering services by giving people directions and public services. Helping those who are in danger or afraid of being killed or injured. This could be humans or animals. Women and children in abusive situations. Animals that are being kept for food or for slaughter. We have probably one of the most memorable things that we've done here at the Abbey is that many years ago, one of our neighbors had a mama sheep and her 2 babies, and they were keeping them to butcher them and put their meat in the freezer for the winter. So Venerable said, well, we have to find a way to not only to create virtue from our side, but to prevent our neighbors from creating the negative karma of having beings killed. So we found she was a vegetarian shepherdess who raised sheep for wool and didn't kill them after they got old, but kept them to pasture, and they just died of old age. So we ended up telling the neighbors, we've got really attached to your sheep. Is it okay if we buy your sheep? So they gave us the market price was, $350. Ellen came with her truck, and she took mom and babies away, and our neighbors got to fill their entire freezer with store-bought stuff. And they found a home. So this is where Bodhisattva's activities, when your teacher says we have to do something about this, you learn creative ways of how to take care of beings who are afraid of being killed or injured. Giving support to those who are grieving. And grief comes in lots of forms, either separation from parents, breaking up a relationship, losing your wealth, losing your status, losing your fame. Anybody in your life that's going through some sort of loss. Giving support to the poor and needy, including shelter, food, clothing, personal advice. Helping others to reconcile who wish to live in harmony. So people who are fighting, people who aren't getting along. Sometimes having a third party in there just to kind of reflect back and see what might work, see the good qualities of both of them, and see kind of help to mediate. To support and encourage those who are sincere practitioners by encouraging them and rejoicing in their good quality. Here's that joy again. And then stopping those who are about to act destructively, which may include taking stern measures to prevent them from harming themselves or others. So there are forms of benefiting others that may, well, once again, your mind's got to be in a place of compassion and love. You could be, assertive and almost wrathful, but you can't get pissed off at them. You've got to be clear about wanting to help them. So sometimes people who are just engaging in negative actions, and people who are closer to you sometimes can take stern measures to prevent them from harming themselves. And then the last one, somewhere along the road, when we have clairvoyant powers, we should be able to use that when all other methods fail. So sometimes it's really good to think of the instances where we've had the opportunity to gather virtue in these ways, and we've either didn't even notice, we thought about it and just passed them by, or we actually engaged in trying to benefit people. So these are some of the ideas on how to use the joyous effort of benefiting others. Okay, so then we're going to go into what gets in the way. So has anybody figured out what the mental state that gets in the way of joyous effort is? Laziness. Yes, sirree. And there's different kinds. There's not just one. Okay, so the first one is laziness of procrastination. Okay, this is couch potato laziness. This is the attachment to sleep or just lying around. I think we all go through this stage. Some of us grow out of it, and some of us don't. We have no energy or interest to do anything virtuous. We might see something that would be virtuous to do, and we might even like to do it. And even though we're not busy, we still put it off. We're just too lazy. We just put it off. So this is also called the laziness of sloth, I think. I'll try tomorrow. Tomorrow comes and you say, wow, I've got a lot on my plate today. I'll go home tonight and I'll have a nice long meditation session. We go home, have dinner, and we're out. And there goes another day, no practice. So we put off virtuous activities that we know would help. See, that's the part. Once you learn a little bit of Dharma and you have some understanding, then you start seeing how these lazinesses become huge obstacles because you've got some wherewithal. You've got a little bit of choice in the matter, but the habits are so strong. So this laziness has a misunderstanding that we have all the time in the world to do something later. So what do you imagine could be the antidote for this laziness?
Impermanence, death.
Yeah, death. What else would get you thinking about doing your practice? Death is certain, the time of death is uncertain. How do you know you're going to be alive next year, next week, or tomorrow? We don't know how long we're going to live, and our spiritual practice is important if we want a happy life as well as a fortunate rebirth. So we try to wrap our minds around that certainty. The other one that does work is also precious human life. How do we know we're going to have another one? And what Geshe Sopa says, do you really think we got this precious human life from lying around in our past lives? You know, it's like, okay, we're here. We've got this remarkable life. What are the cause and conditions to have this? You know, it's to make aspirations, it's to have pure ethical conduct, practice the 6 far-reaching practices. It wasn't laying around, it wasn't surfing the internet, it wasn't sitting around having dinner, golfing, you know, going, you know, whatever. And that precious human life is very, very difficult to garner, and it doesn't last very long. So this is a wonderful antidote also to this, the laziness of procrastination. Okay, the second one is laziness of busyness. And I went into Venerable's teaching on this that she did back in November. Now, the laziness of busyness, we don't call this laziness in our regular society. But from a spiritual perspective, we're lazy when we're doing all sorts of unnecessary things. So she says, okay, in our culture, everybody says, you have to have a life. All right, get a life. Which means we are so busy that we don't even have time to sit down and breathe. We have to have every moment of our life filled with some kind of social engagement, some sort of activity. So busy that we don't have time to look inside our hearts and see what's going on, how we're doing, what's motivating us. Keeping ourselves so busy that we exhaust ourselves mentally and physically with worldly activities, so there's no time for quiet reflection, there's no time for study, there's no time for contemplation. So from a spiritual perspective, this is a form of laziness. So, I mean, just to grok the idea that everything that propels us, that is our gross national product in this country, is around the laziness of busyness. Sense pleasures which gratify is held to be the highest type of pleasure for those who are still convinced that what you see is what brings happiness. There is no view of karmic causality or future life. So the happiness of this life is the main propellant of the laziness of busyness. And what's very interesting is that I was looking at some of the things we do to distract ourselves from practice. Mountain climbing, parasailing, parachuting, shark fishing, traveling to new and exotic places, any form of amusement. And in this, I mean, we have a lot of, it's as good as it gets. We have a lot of things that distract us, that get the adrenaline going, that get the excitement going. What Venerable Tarpa said, the near enemy of joy is exaltation. You know, this kind of, this hit. I mean, also the laziness of business is about being addicted to the hit of what samsaric pleasure can give us. Which we've got these extreme sports. I mean, we're just fueling the adrenaline and this near-death experiences that we just, not knowing that, we may be creating the causes for some serious, unfortunate rebirths. But from a Dharma perspective, we're wasting our human potential. Okay, that's what the laziness of busyness has got us going with. So it's important that we are able to discern our motivations for why we do what we do. All right, so the laziness of busyness is one of those that we have to really look at. So the antidote to laziness of busyness, let's see what we got here. Well, it's looking at what we can be creating instead. We're so busy doing sometimes some very silly things, as Venerable says, sometimes dangerous things, that we end up creating a lot of destructive karma because when our lives are moving at this kind of pace, and we're hooked into the pleasures of this life, she says what happens is our conscientiousness and our values really go to the wayside about what are effects of our actions to ourselves and others, that our conscientiousness really is kind of out of sight. So we end up doing pretty much anything that we want, anything that feels good. So the antidote is to be able to think of our actions and their consequences, to have some concept of of karmic causality. It settles us down so we can look at what is important. We need to see the disadvantages of worldly activities, which not only waste our precious human life, but they also weaken our aspiration for awakening, and many times produce attachment, anger, jealousy, lying, idle talk, which are going to bring some not so very happy future results. Right? So we just have to, and it's not like the Buddha saying, give up your life. As Venerable Semkye said the other day, she says, it's the attachment, it's the craving, it's the addiction to this life that we're looking at kind of letting go of. We still have to maintain our health. We still have our relationships to sustain. We need to make a livelihood. But to understand the motivation of what's driving a lot of these things is so important. And if you put joyous effort into your life, then you get to see that a lot of the things that we do to sustain our lives can be done with a virtuous motivation. For this long-term goal of awakening, just about anything we do can sustain that. Okay, then the third kind of laziness, which is the laziness of discouragement or self-deprecation, putting ourselves down, low self-esteem, self-criticism, thinking that we're hopeless. We think all these thoughts are true, that we're hopeless and we can't accomplish anything, so why bother? So Geshe Zopa, the Lamrim, has this discouragement because it's so important to look at it, is that it's broken down into 3 types of discouragement. So they even make this even more detailed. All right, so the first one, discouragement about the goal. Okay, so if you're on the Bodhisattva path, okay, folks in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition here, we're on the Bodhisattva path. We have vowed to eliminate all our afflictions, overcome all of our confusion, ignorance, and limitations, and fully realize our human potential to become a Buddha. But when we think how hard it is just to work with one single bad habit or develop one virtuous quality, we can say, you know, can we actually do this? Is enlightenment possible? Look at all I've got to do. It takes so long. There's so much to practice and so much to understand. I don't have what it takes. And so we fall into this, well, first of all, we don't give ourselves a chance to actualize our own dreams because we say, I can't do it, it's too hard, I'm too stupid, I don't understand, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to go sit over there and forget about it. What's the use? And we become our own worst enemy with that apathetic mind state. We're shooting ourselves in the foot all the time by having these kind of inner dialogues with ourselves that simply aren't true. We just feel sorry for ourselves. We sulk and complain that the world's unfair. So what's the antidote? Well, the Buddha. The Buddha is the prime model for us. He is incapable of lying. And he says that he was just like us at one time. He hasn't always been omniscient. The Buddha was like us once upon a time. He practiced many lifetimes, sometimes getting thrown into lower realms because of his non-virtue. His greed, his laziness, his fear, his attachment. But along the way, he attained a precious human life. He met the teachings, and he started to practice just like us. So we have to remember, put the Buddha's life in context to our own. Buddhists don't come out of nothing. They come out of this world. He had to look at his mind. He had to learn how to rein in his afflictions. He had to practice using the antidotes, developing his virtuous qualities. And most importantly, he had to learn how to realize how things actually exist. So he created the cause and conditions for his own awakening, using joyous effort as the fuel. He taught all that beings from the smallest insect to the most brilliant human being in our world have the same Buddha potential to achieve this state. And because we have precious human life, we've hit the jackpot. We have these great minds. We have these wonderful conditions. All the conditions that we could ever possibly need. In fact, we are best equipped in this precious human life to make some serious progress along the path. Okay, so that's the first discouragement. The second one is discouragement about the means to attain the goal. So now we've gotten past, okay, we've got some confidence, some faith in the fact that enlightenment is possible. So then we go about, well, what is it actually going to take? And here we get caught up in the second kind of thinking, which is, how am I ever going to understand everything I need to become a Buddha? All those hardships I have to go through, all those realizations that I have to have so that I can help each sentient being exactly where they are. I mean, bodhisattvas are supposed to be able to give their bodies to others. I can't even give away a chocolate chip cookie. How am I going to be able to eventually give away even my body, my possessions, my virtue? Too much suffering. So this second form actually scares us into not doing anything. The understanding needed here is that okay, so here's the antidotes. And Geshe Zopa is just so marvelous about how we do this. The understanding needed here is to endure hardships of some kind in the course of everyday life. Okay, here's another one of those reality checks. So we have some sort of hardships that we deal with, small and big, through the course of our lives as we're living, working, having relationships. And since beginningless time, we have been trying in our efforts to find happiness and avoid suffering. But we tend to be running in the wrong direction, creating the causes for suffering, and can't figure out what the causes for happiness are, and creating all sorts of karma in the process. All right, so there's this level of confusion due to our self-centeredness that only cares about oneself. So we get born, age, sick, die, born, age, sick, die, limitless times with all sorts of horrible sufferings, all sorts of disappointments. So the antidote to this discouragement about it's just too far, it's too hard, there's too much suffering to attain awakening. Geshe Sopa says that if this suffering and samsara had been worthwhile, so what the discouragement is, it's so hard and there's so much suffering to attain awakening, I'm just going to stay in samsara and I'm going to go through birth, aging, sickness, and death over and over again, lower realms, upper realms, lower realms, upper realms, and tolerate that kind of suffering. Geshe Sopa says, if the suffering in samsara had been worthwhile, we would have ended it a long time ago and would have attained ultimate happiness by now. So you have to understand that the suffering of being born over and over again in samsara serves absolutely no purpose. The truth of the matter is that hardship involved in attaining awakening is nothing in comparison. Because even when you hear about how much hardship and difficulty bodhisattvas encounter on the path, it's all short term. They see each problem as an opportunity, and since awakening is a state of existence with no end, no pain, no suffering to attain, and it's doable, because it'll end. It can be measured, it will end, it will go for a certain time, and then it's over. In comparison, the samsara that we're hooked in, the suffering is endless. There's no end to it. So if you weigh the bodhisattva's temporary suffering to move along the path till their minds don't even experience that anymore, and the suffering of ordinary beings that just goes on and on and on without an end, Geshe Sopa is trying to say, which one for the long term do you want to do? If we're going to suffer, let's suffer for a great goal. And eventually the suffering stops and we're not even there yet. So it makes sense to willingly go through a certain amount of pain in order to eliminate endless misery. So he's got this great analogy. You know, he takes it right into our everyday experience. He says, the analogy is you have a disease that's treatable surgically. All right? You're willing to endure being operated on, even being cut open, because you know that the long-term result will be less suffering. Or let's say we've got to take bitter medicines or injections. We know the temporary unpleasantness is removing the causes for much worse suffering later on, so we endure it. So he says, so it is with awakening. You know, we're going to have different kinds of sufferings, like having surgery. We're removing the afflictions. We're removing the ignorance for the long-term permanent cure of all the causes of suffering. And we go through this in daily life. We're willing to go through all sorts of hardship and suffering for happinesses of just this life. Imagine going through a kind of suffering and difficulty, knowing that at the end there will be absolutely none of that. I mean, it's unimaginable because we experience dissatisfaction so much. The mind that doesn't have an experience of suffering is unimaginable, but it's possible. And that's what the Bodhisattva path is all about. As we travel along the path of a bodhisattva, we take whatever difficulties we encounter right into the path to transform our minds. So we gradually can use those hardships to grow our capacity to not only bear them, but actually to see them as times for growth and the cultivation of bodhicitta and our good qualities, rather than, oh man, here we go again. Just to have the kind of mind that every time we run up against difficulties in our life, to see them as, I'm going to learn something here. I mean, it's a hard mind to cultivate. I know that for sure. I share that. But it's possible. And the more we do it, the easier it becomes. And we start with the small stuff. Okay, then the third form of discouragement is the discouragement of where we must practice. Okay, so we begin to deal with the first two kinds of discouragement. And last but not least is we have to practice by taking rebirths and samsara for eons. Because, well, first of all, we're in it till we achieve the path of seeing. And then with bodhisattvas, we intentionally decide to come back here to benefit all sentient beings. So what this discouragement is saying, more suffering, more misery. Life in cyclic existence is bad enough. And then combined with all the practicing I have to do on the path while I'm here, I'm not sure I'm up for it. If I could stay in a nice, peaceful place where no one will bother me, well, then maybe it might be okay. But right in the middle of samsara, how am I ever going to get to practice the way that I want? There's sentient beings getting in my way. They're bothering me. So it's the difficulty of where we want to practice. We want an ideological place. We want a Shambhala. We want a paradise somewhere where we can just go into a beautifully well-maintained cave, have all of our accoutrements, all of our pleasures, and be able to reach Buddhahood without having any struggles. Is there a way to live in samsara and not experience that? No. And as bodhisattvas, well, they don't experience suffering. Right now, we are continually experiencing the suffering of having a body and mind under the control of afflictions and karma. That's where we are right now. Even if we aren't experiencing it right now, we know for a fact that it's going to show up or not. And then we just get carried away by our afflictions and self-centered thoughts. So that's kind of the circumstance right now. However, bodhisattvas, the antidote to this discouragement of, there's too much suffering to even try. I want a nice place, leave me alone. Most of our suffering comes from a very fixed, erroneous way of thinking and a wrong view of how we think the world exists. But along the bodhisattva path, when they understand how things really exist, they don't have to cling to ideas of any inherently existent self that's suffering or a phenomena. They don't experience the world as a suffering place. They come back here to benefit sentient beings with a mind that's totally filled with joy, totally filled with generosity, totally filled with fortitude, ethical conduct. There's no sense of hardship. They keep their bodhisattva vows purely. So those of us right now, some of us have bodhisattva vows in order to help and benefit all sentient beings. And that's where we get to accrue incredible collections of merit day and night. They do it just by breathing. They do it when they're sleeping. They do it even when they're not even paying attention because their vows are kept so purely. So the antidote is to be, take lay vows, to take refuge vows, take monastic vows, take bodhisattva vows, because the merit accumulated is huge, and along the line, the suffering ends. We create the cause and conditions to not experience the suffering of samsara, mostly by realizing the nature of reality. Okay, so those are the three lazinesses: the laziness of procrastination or sloth, the laziness of busyness, and the laziness of discouragement. Now, joyous effort is a wonderful quality to have, but it actually needs some support. So it's got 4 favorable conditions for not only developing it, but sustaining it. Okay, so we're working on our laziness. Now what else can we do to support it and sustain it? These are really beautiful qualities of mind that we need to cultivate as well to keep this. Huh? Joyous effort. What did I say? Oh. See? It's very, very hard to counteract. So to cultivate joyous effort, it needs a lot of support. It needs a lot of friends. So there are 4 main friends of joyous effort. The first one is the power of aspiration. This is a wholesome form of desire. Believe it or not, desire has a wholesome form that has a natural affinity towards wholesome actions and goals, because if you don't have any interest in spiritual practice, you won't do it. If we try half-heartedly, we won't get the results we want. In contrast, if we want something badly enough, we will go for it with a lot of energy and enthusiasm. All right, so aspiration is the strong desire to be able to just love doing virtue. It never gives aspiration. We wish to never give up our interest in the Dharma because it's the foundation of the path leading to our goal. Aspiration is the intensity of our desire or aspiration determines how much we actually practice. So if we have a little bit of aspiration, we do a little bit of practice. We have a lot of aspiration, it fuels a lot of practice. Aspiration becomes like a pillar holding up our effort in virtue. Right? So this is one of the, what's it called? The bottom piece of concrete when you're, foundation. It's the foundation of our virtue. So how do we develop this aspiration to practice? Well, up until now, we haven't really wanted to surrender our unwholesome activities, okay? So the pleasure, the 8 worldly concerns, our unwholesome activities and thoughts, we haven't put a lot of effort into cultivating the virtuous ones. How do we know that? Because we're still here in samsara experiencing all kinds of problems. That's how we know. If we think about karmic causality, how virtuous actions bring pleasant experiences and non-virtuous ones bring unpleasant experiences, we develop some faith in a karma that is a great motivator for joyous effort. Okay, so we fuel the aspiration by having some understanding of karma. What, even Jesus said, what you sow, you're going to reap. That kind of is the karmic causality of life. And so the aspiration is sort of supported by this growing faith that if I create virtue, I'm going to experience happy results. So developing faith and confidence karma is one of the ways to develop aspiration. Bodhisattva's strong confidence in karma shatters any tendency within them to act out of self-interest because they see what the results will be and they want their actions to benefit. So the strong confidence in karma is also a great antidote to the self-centered thought. Okay, so that's the first friend of joyous effort, is aspiration. The second one is power of steadfastness. This quality is wonderful to have because when we are developing our virtuous qualities and discarding the non-virtuous ones, a constancy enables us to make effort with having all of these ups and downs and how we're going to sustain it. So we first start to eliminate the more habituated negative states of mind. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. Some days we're just not going to have any success. Some days we're going to be somewhat successful. Some days we're going to be completely successful. And there are going to be days where we're going to feel a lot of faith and confidence in our practice, and some days we're going to be real on shaky ground. So the steadfastness, by just simply showing up and continuing to work on them little by little, really gives our practice a stability, which is what we need. Aspiration is wonderful, but without being resolute, many times our best intentions or aspirations fall short because we give up. Okay, so we're kind of working on these different levels of the path that we need this steadfastness. We have to discern what activities are appropriate or not before we undertake them. So to encourage our steadfastness, we're going to have to learn to discern, okay, if I'm going to put a whole bunch of effort and stay steady on this undertaking, is this of benefit? Is this virtuous? Or is this just using a whole bunch of energy and constancy and steadfastness on something that isn't going to serve the long-term goal? So we're getting a little bit of wisdom here too as we go along. Are we up to the task and can we complete them if we decide they're worthwhile? Now, this is not to say that we undertake only the easy stuff. If an endeavor seems difficult, if you clearly see that it will be beneficial, then it's good to hang in. And a lot of beneficial activity requires a kind of steadfastness and a willingness to be there for the long haul. We start something because it appeals to us, we find it interesting, but as soon as we find it not so easy or enjoyable, we jump ship and start something else. And this is a negative habit that actually creates the causes in the future not to be able to accomplish or attain our spiritual goals. So that's one of the karmic results of creating joyous effort, is that in the future when we endeavor to do, and as we're going along the bodhisattva path and taking on more and more virtuous projects that entail a lot of endeavor, that we'll be able to complete them, that we're not going to get stranded in the middle of the project because we run out of fuel, or we give up, or we get discouraged. Because that negative habit is something that we don't want to have when it comes to cultivating virtue, because we're not going to be able to accomplish our spiritual goals. And if we don't finish our virtuous activities that we commit to, the results will be disappointing. And this happens, this is a problem many of us have. It's in our efforts to change old mental habits because we see that they cause us so much suffering. We endeavor to work on them, but many times we go into them with a lot of unrealistic expectations, like I'm really going to take care of this anger within the next year. I'm going to really work on my attachment to food in the next 30 days. And that, we don't realize how long some of these habitual negative states and habits take before we see some reduction in them or some, infrequent, they start to be not so frequent. we don't give up, so we don't want to give up on ourselves, and so the constancy of practice to change them. So we have to have this development of constancy. We have to be realistic about our expectations. And that's one of the things that steadfastness provides. It's not like a sprinter. You're going to be more like a marathon runner with some of these negative habits. You're going to have to just take your time. And so steadfastness gives us the mind that says, okay, this is going to take a while, a little bit at a time. No hurry, where to go. I'm heading in the right direction. One of the qualities that counteracts a lack of steadfastness or an inconsistency is a virtuous pride or self-confidence. It is defined in relationship to action, ability, and affliction. Okay, so the enemy of steadfastness is inconsistency or the lack of steadfastness. First of all, one of the antidotes is the pride of action. Is to realize that others can't do our practice for us. We have to complete it ourselves. Our journey to freedom from afflictions and karma can't be accomplished by others, but only by ourselves. They can't hold our hands on our practice. They can't show up in the hall for us. They can't do the water bowls for us. They can't do our prostrations for us. We've got to show up for ourselves. So that's the pride of action. The pride of ability is, it's not a kind of self-centered pride that makes us think that we're much better than others. It's the pride that says, I have so much going for me this life. I mean, I've got a precious human life. I have so much going. Most sentient beings have none of the great fortune that I have in this life. They are incapable of accomplishing what they most desire. And by comparison, I've got things handed to me. I've got all the conducive circumstances to accomplish a lot on the path this life. And so we really get some self-confidence, we get some faith in our abilities. Then lastly, the pride in the face of afflictions. This is a great courageous attitude that sees the self-centered thought and the afflictions as our real enemy and is determined that they will not get the better of us. In all actions, I will examine my mind, and the moment a disturbing attitude arises, endangering myself and others, I will firmly confront and avert it. This is the pride in the face of afflictions. If we lack this kind of strong determination and are faint-hearted, the slightest setback will turn into a major obstacle. So this is really getting quite serious about we have to counteract the self-centered thought. And as soon as any of these afflictions start to shake and shimmer and get us stirred up, we have to really confront them at the get-go. We can't let them take over and start running the show. The Buddhas are called lions because they exemplify fearlessness. Bodhisattvas are youngsters in the lineage of lions. They have a pride that they will be victorious over all afflictions, and we need to develop this kind of pride as well. This is using our wisdom to work against these mental habits and propensities that bring suffering to our minds. All right, so the ability to identify those afflictions and to really go after them. The third friend of joyous effort is the power of joy itself. So the first two powers help us to develop joyous effort, and joy itself helps once the effort is beginning and gaining some momentum. It works by bringing happiness to our minds while practicing virtue, then increases our joy so that we can't get enough of virtuous activity. Imagine having a mind that sees virtuous activity like a child being out on the playground. You just can't get enough of virtue. Like a herd of elephants that plunge into a cool lotus pond to escape the scorching heat, so too should we engage and follow through with our virtuous actions. All happiness in samsara is a temporary reduction in suffering, but if we continue to indulge, we will have yet more experiences, more suffering results. Virtuous joy is the opposite. The more we engage in virtue, the deeper the inner happiness will only increase. So once again, the whole path is like building blocks. You know, we want to really see these pieces all fitting together a little bit at a time. Okay, so I think I might have lost count here, folks. I think I might have. Yeah, okay, this is the fourth one. Fourth one. Okay, folks, for some of you who think they might be overwhelmed at this point, the power of rest. All right, Jess, here we are practicing like our hair's on fire, right? as they say, with this intense joy accompanying our aspirations, sustained by our steadfastness. But yeah, we have to keep an eye on ourselves. You know, if we push to an extreme, the body and the mind are going to collapse out of exhaustion. You know, we just get too carried away. Some of us type A's, when we hit the Dharma path, we have to be careful. We have to be able to balance, because we want to practice like our hair's on fire and then we run up against the wall. This will cause, okay, so we collapse out of exhaustion. This will cause us to get upset about creating virtue and may even develop an aversion to it. We are beaten down by our own overenthusiasm. I don't know, I kind of want to have that experience just to see what it's like. Because laziness is such a hard affliction to deal with. To actually have an overenthusiasm to practice virtue, it's something maybe to experience, and then to know that we have to also be able to have some balance in our life, to not push so hard, especially for us overachievers. This is a practice on developing skill on knowing when to keep going and when to rest. Not like sleeping the days away, but rest especially after completing a virtuous endeavor. You know, we have this at the Abbey here. When we, after we built this building, I think Venerable said, okay, everybody, let's just take a few days, unstructured time, take a walk, rest, study, go look at the sky, go in the forest. This building was a huge virtuous undertaking, and after we had some downtime. We want to be able to rest in order to care for ourselves so we can continue our good actions. And Geshe Sopa makes a point, especially when we're taking care of the sick and elderly, which can be very stressful. If we don't keep ourselves balanced and we wait too long, there's going to be 2 sick people instead of just 1. So we have to be able to renew ourselves so we can continue to care for others. Not too tight, not too loose. We learn where our middle ground is. And that is actually different for everyone. This is another thing that's very important to garner wisdom along the path, is that, when you're in a community of Dharma friends, or even in a community here, people have different capacities. Their level of joyous effort, their level of steadfastness, their level of aspiration, their level of joy is so very, very different. And you've got to be careful to not get into this. We fall into it a lot, is this comparing mind. Oh gosh, this person, they can get up in the morning at 4:30, they're in the hall at 5 o'clock, they stay there till 8:15, they study till the lights go out at 10. I'm such a lazy butt, You got to be careful. Everybody's got a different capacity. So it's really important not too tight, not too loose, and to learn where our capacities are. We want to remain in the continuous river of virtue, not going to either extreme. So once again, here's another lesson on the 2 extremes. As one great teacher, Kuntang Tenpei Dronme, advised his students when he was away, some students work so hard that they forget to eat all day. But after 3 days, they totally relax and go wild. This kind of student will not complete anything. Therefore, your effort must be like a contiguous river. All right, so when the teacher's away, don't go wild. And don't forget to eat, but do remember to practice. Okay, so we have a few more pieces here. I was hoping to get to these. Okay, how to practice joyous effort. Here, okay. Oh, the war analogy again. Warriors in battle must do 2 things. They must engage in combat to protect themselves from their enemy's weapons, and for us is to use virtue and the Dharma to protect ourselves from the self-centered thought and our afflictions, and at the same time to protect ourselves, and at the same time to try to defeat them. So Dharma practitioners have to take the offensive when it comes to afflictions, and at the same time protect ourselves from them. Armies of afflictions are well organized and devious, with their self-centered thought as their general. We try to subdue them, one of the afflictions, and another one arises to destroy another part of our virtue. I mean, it's unending how the afflictions arise. We try and act constructively, and some disturbing attitude makes it very difficult. To practice the Dharma properly, we have to understand the goal, awakening, identify the obstacles to that goal, myriad obstacles depending on which virtue you're trying to cultivate and what you're trying to eliminate, the antidote to address each obstacle, and how to apply it as a medicine. So it's crucial that we hear the teaching so we get the roadmap. But without putting what we hear into practice, it can actually increase our faults like arrogance and can contaminate our mind. So if we become just talking heads about the Dharma, rather than really integrating them and taking them to our hearts, we just become Dharma snobs. You know, we know a little bit about this, we know all about that, we've done this, we've done that, we understand this, but there's nothing in here. So there's one of the extremes that can happen if we don't pay attention. The other hand is that we go to the other extreme thinking that by controlling the mind is the only way to develop virtue, single-pointed concentration, to understand reality. So we put our minds in solitary confinement with no flexibility or any open-mindedness. So we go from being intellectual heads to then saying, I've got to let all thoughts go. I've got to empty the mind. That since we haven't studied the Dharma, all we're going to do is sit in like someplace and we're going to empty our minds, and all these realizations are going to come. The single point of concentration is going to arise. There's not going to be any obstacles. Because we haven't studied the Dharma, we aren't aware of the ignorance and the conniving self-centeredness thought, and it becomes even stronger. Because we don't have the tools. We're just bent on just emptying. Where our afflictions arise, we have no idea what to do with them. We have no idea how to avoid them. Let me just will my mind to stop thinking. And this is a huge misconception of what people think meditation practice is that I just sit here, put it down, just have a blank screen up there, and that something's going to happen, some wisdom, some compassion is going to simultaneously arise. That's not meditation, that's not practice. So we have two of these extremes that we have to be very, very careful to avoid. And the two tools that we have to keep these out is mindfulness. We remember what to abandon and what to cultivate. Without it, our minds are like wild elephants that make trouble, including destroying all of our virtuous actions. But we can only recollect or be mindful if we know what to recollect. Mindfulness needs an object, and we want to remember an object and identify it with our wisdom mind. Our wisdom mind knows what to do and not to do, what is reality, what is wrong conception. So this is the part of taking the understanding of the Dharma and integrating it into our life. All right, so we're not talking heads, we've got it down into our hearts. And then we go to the cushion, and because of the wisdom that's in our hearts and minds, we're able to grow the ability to think clearly, to be able to integrate the Dharma more and more into our lives, and to be able to concentrate. Okay, so we use the mind that wants to be stable and clear, and we use the Dharma that have all of these great teachings, and we put them together. And mindfulness, which wants to keep focused on a virtuous object, has to understand what that object is. So it's important to know what to abandon, what to cultivate. Along with that, we need introspective awareness that keeps an eye on our mind to see what it's doing. It checks our practice. It keeps us honest and alert to the state of our minds. So without the two of these, we're not going to be able to progress. And they will become very great supportive friends on how to practice joyous effort in our everyday life. So we'll need to have the mindfulness and introspective awareness when we're off the cushion, and we'll need to have the mindfulness and introspective awareness when we're on the cushion. So there's a lot of tools here. I think there's a lot of joy here. I mean, this practice helps Sergeant Joyous Effort just retire. But it's a practice that requires time. It's sort of like building a muscle. It's a little bit at a time. And the first thing that's really important is to understand where your capacity is and which of the laziness comes up for us. I think we all have a little bit of all of them, but some might be different. Some people may have the laziness of procrastination mostly. Some are very hooked into their lives, like overly busy. And some just get really, really discouraged. And they play on each other. I mean, they just kind of feed each other. So it's really important to see that small kindnesses, small amounts of virtue daily can build up this beautiful, joyous effort. To not underestimate the power of our small deeds. And as time goes on, it just builds, and to keep this mind delighting in virtue. And to realize that when we do virtuous activities, if we give ourselves time to just rejoice, that the mind is a very happy mind. You know, we don't need adrenaline. We don't need a lot of things that the world provides to have the kind of happiness that we're looking for. Virtuous activities supply a certain kind of joy that we cannot find in worldly activities. It just can't. It's not excitement, it's not adrenaline, it's not a rush, it's not exaltation, it's not a high. There's something about it that's so clear and clean and content and type of delight. I think delight's probably the closest word I could say that's synonymous to joy. Anyway, so that's what I've kind of garnered from my thinking about this over the years, and for Geshe Zopa for his wonderful teachings and commentary in his book called Steps on the Path to Enlightenment. There's a whole book on the Bodhisattva way that goes through all of these 6 far-reaching practices. And this one is in there, and he spends a lot of time on it. So if you want to have something to read, to encourage you along the way. So let's just take a few minutes here, and then we'll do a little tiny bit of digestion medicine, and then we'll do our dedication on page 30. Any comments, any questions before we go to digestion? Any insights? Any joy? Any inkling? Any little? It's around here somewhere. I smell it somewhere. Yeah, Ken.
Well, it seems to me that putting this into effect helps us with the equanimity because we're just so used to the hits, you know, the excitement, the adrenaline, the rush. And if we're taking delight in virtuous activity, we're more on a stable. We're not with the highs and the lows that we're just so addicted to.
Yep. And this is a wonderful antidote to that kind of rush. But I think there's going to be, for some of us, there's going to be a little bit of withdrawal.
Right.
You know, we can't, no cold turkey here. You know, it's got to be slowly implemented into one's life. Or once again, we're going to be discouraged and then we're not going to go anywhere. Yeah.